What's up, subscribers? Sunjutsu here, and today I wanted to go ahead and talk to you guys with Oakley High Def. How you doing, Oakley?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. I'm excited for the launch of the new game and possible historical stuff that is looming in the future too.
Awesome, and that's what the focus of this video is going to be today. The more of the well, actually all the latter, and then I'll have another video coming up that will talk more about Warhammer and your opinions on some of the online aspects of it. But first, let's go ahead and talk about the historical stuff. This is just talking about the presumably historical, maybe Total War Victoria game that might come out, may or may not be the next historical title. So first of all, I want to first ask you, what other eras would you like to see in a Total War game? What other types of parts of history, human history, would you like to see?
That's a good question. I've always been partial to like the medieval period just because there's so many movies on it, so many great themes, great technology progression. But I think new areas that we haven't explored yet, I think maybe pushing on the cusp of World War I would be really cool. But then also expanding to different parts of the world. I think what they did for Japan was really cool. The game itself had awesome mechanics, but the theme and the setting was great. So people have been discussing doing a warring period. What's it called? The Warring States period in China, and just expanding into that whole region. Not too many people know about it, so I'm not sure about the appetite for people, but there's definitely a lot of history there, a lot of interesting stuff. The development in China in particular, history-wise, they surpassed the West in technology and population and productivity, so there's a lot of stuff to be done in that area. So I think that would be really cool to go explore.
That actually leads me into my next question. I'm glad you kind of went into that. What part of the map of the world map, the world map that we live in today, would you like to see in a Total War campaign map the most, besides Europe, since we've been in Europe, and I guess maybe besides Japan either, because we've also been in Japan. Well, other parts of the world.
I think stretching between the Middle East and Japan, right in between there. There's so much, such a huge landmass.
That would be good.
Everything, like the scope and the size of Rome 2, but you just shift the camera, pan it to the right, and you have a whole bunch of stuff to cover.
That would be very interesting, having the Arab states, India, and then what presumably China, Thailand, Vietnam, all those. That actually would be pretty cool.
Yeah, and if they could do an emphasis on like trade routes, Silk Road, or by sea, put more of an emphasis on that. A lot of cool stuff you could do there. Transmission of technology back and forth across that as well. Cool.
This is actually going pretty smoothly toward the next question that I had, which is what non-Western faction would you like to play as the most? And just keep in mind more toward a 1800 to 1900 sort of era, around that time.
That's a really good question. Not too familiar with the state of the Chinese empire during that period, or what was going on then, but I would definitely like to explore it and figure that out. Something about the East would be great, but around that time period, I guess the end of the peak of the Ottoman Empire, how that's still kind of hanging on would be cool to play. Kind of an old empire, bringing it back to its peak, and then I guess the Ottomans would lead you into World War I, and they're the old dying, the sick man of Europe, I think is the name they were given.
That is what that is the nickname I guess they gave them back in the day, because the Ottoman Empire was sort of backwards comparatively to the Western nations, at least right before World War I, I guess after that as well.
Yeah, and seeing if you could flip that around and revive this sick and dying man, or perhaps be an offshoot empire for it, take it over and revitalize it.
That's awesome. Now, we already got in Japan as in Fall of the Samurai between the time period. I don't recall exactly what time period Fall of the Samurai starts out at, but I do know that it's within the 1800 to 1900 time period. Now, if we had, say, a world type of Total War game where it had most parts of the world, sort of like Empire, but around 1800, 1900, do you think Japan is something that should be revisited as part of a zone of influence on the campaign map?
Oh, that'd be really interesting. Like, I think Empire did it pretty well, where you had different areas of the map that you could kind of shoot over to, and I think Japan slash bordering onto China would be definitely a place that would want to include for historical reasons. But it's always weird when you simplify an area of the map down to like two, three provinces. Like even in Attila and Rome, when you can take over all of the British Isles with 2-3 settlements, taking over all of Japan with a couple settlements kind of takes away from it. I don't know. I'm kind of torn between the two. It would be cool if you could go over to that theater of war and it would just be really huge. Like even in Empire, when you went to visit India, it was pretty blown up. The Americas was kind of blown up. So as long as they do it justice, I think it should definitely be included.
India was definitely huge back in Empire. It took me forever to conquer the whole thing. Do you think that Sega would do Japan? Going toward the history of later 1900s, where it came to Japan, and
yeah, I mean
Japanese,
they were in the
army.
First World War. Yeah, that's where they made a lot of their conquests into China, and they made a lot of their expansion. Definitely, that's important. And something to keep in mind too is like maybe this sounds super expansive. But at the same time, they've announced that for Total War Warhammer, they're going to stitch together 3 different maps, and that's going to be a larger map than we've ever seen before. So maybe in historical, they'll find a way to stitch together a couple games.
So going towards the maps, I'm glad that you actually brought that up. I know back in Empire, we had the maps where there were zones. You kind of clicked on the button, took you to that zone, took you to that map. It's a completely different map. They did state in Warhammer that they're stitching the map together so you can continuously go from one map to the other map. Which, for a world type scenario, for our world, which one do you think would work better for if there was a Victoria Total War going to happen? A zone map where you click the button and it goes to different zones on the map, or a continuous map where it just kind of circles the globe?
Jeez, that sounds so cool for the larger version. It's hard to say. I wouldn't be against them cutting corners and making it like an Empire, but I think if they're able to pull it off graphically with the other version, that would be really cool. Maybe if you're restricted when you're traveling to, the East Indies or wherever, there's only certain trade routes or certain regions of the ocean that you can go through, and everything else is kind of like fog of war, and it's zoned off, but you can still see your ships traveling. You can lay ambushes. You can do piracy along those areas. I think it'd be cool if you physically have to get there, and there's stuff that can happen along the transit. Maybe there's storms that you have to avoid, or you take attrition as you move through. Simply teleporting always has a downside. But either way, I'm kind of cool for it. I am excited to see kind of what Warhammer introduces, because as they explore new things for Warhammer, they implement new features. It has potential to make its way back into a history title. So I think large maps with no jumping between them is kind of where Warhammer's going. So maybe that's where they'd go historically.
So going towards the Victoria style era, 1800, 1900, what potential faction would you like to play? Overall, the other factions that you could possibly play as, and I'm not just talking about a non-Western faction. I'm talking about any faction that you could possibly see being or playing as. Which one would you like to play as the most?
Well, I have a French ancestry, so I think they'd be really fun to mess with, to poke around, beat off the British colonial aspirations and kind of mess that up. Also, as Germany heads towards unification, when they jump from kind of still a pretty good power as like the Prussians and all that, but all of a sudden when they consolidated together, they became one of the largest land armies and land powers almost instantaneously once they united. I think playing as them would be really cool too.
And they were actually one of the strongest factions when it came to World War I. They were able to fend off most
I know, that's the crazy
France,
thing.
United, and Russia, and the Ottoman. They were just, there was a faction that was overpowered during World War I. They might have been it. Going towards some mechanics for this Victoria game that we don't know is going to be released yet, and may never be. How would you do Civil Wars and Revolutions? What would be, and take account that during this time, the American Civil War is happening, so it divides itself pretty evenly between all the states. So how would you implement all these two mechanics into the game?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this whole era is known for its revolutions at home, different ideas of nationalism, or springing up of certain ideas that would overthrow the monarchy, or the monarchy trying to suppress. And there's a lot of stuff going on as these empires spread and the people were getting suppressed, like the Americans try and spread up against them. So I don't know how they would do that. I mean, I know in Empire there was a mechanic where you could get revolutions and you could dynamically change what type of government you had, and depending on which government route you chose, it had different kind of buffs and debuffs. Combine that maybe with Rome 2's internal politics system, where there's a a power meter that fluctuates. I'm guessing they would go down the route of internal balancing act, but then external factors, like the more you conquer, like in Attila you get more corruption, but maybe in this game the more you conquer, the more people would resent
unrest
you, and then unrest would grow, and then you could have the emergence of, I think, popping up with factions, or maybe even complete, like if you do a colonial empire, it could, instead of you directly controlling areas, the United States would function kind of like a satrapy or things like that, and then at certain times, if there's enough revolutionary fervor, then it would splinter and that satrapy would become its own independent faction. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that they can draw on from previous games. So yeah, I really do hope they make it dynamic, and you can just imagine the agents that you would throw into that to cause dissent.
Imagine playing as America,
and
then around the Civil War time, like the southern states start getting a little bit more unrest, and then Lincoln gets the presidency, or Lincoln comes up on your leader roster, and then they're just like, you know what? Nah, we're not doing this right now. They start.
Yeah, there's tons of cool stuff they could do.
Okay, last question, and thank you so much for being part of this. If there is a Victoria Total War, do you think that there's a huge possibility that there's going to be that the expansion to that game would be a World War I expansion, and that's going off the popularity of trailers and games such as Battlefield 1 and all that?
Yeah, I was about to mention. The Battlefield 1 trailer had a really great reception. World War 1 hasn't really been covered in a grand strategy like Rome 1 like Total War with the Battlefield. So yeah, I think there's potential for it. I don't necessarily think they can pull off an entire experience of World War 1 for like a full title, just because like there's a lot to cover, but the time period, like the battles are too large, tactics are too large. There's no, it would just completely break the formula. But I could see World War One being a kind of like a standalone expansion, or maybe you would just experience the Eastern Front, or portions of the Western Front, just selections of it.
Yeah,
I could see them doing. I don't necessarily see them doing as a whole new
something
title.
like a Napoleon-style campaign where it's kind of
more
centered.
Like a very narrative-driven, focused campaign where they take the chaos of World War One and kind of give it some rhyme and reason.
I completely understand that. All right, that's perfect. Thank you so much for being with us today, Oakley. Now, to you guys who are watching, what do you guys think of the possibility of Victoria Total War, or Total War Victoria, being a possible game? What are some of the features and some of the things that we've touched on right now that you guys would like to give your 2 cents on? Put in the comment section below. Let me know. Let's see if we get over 50 likes for Total Warhammer coming out next week, and the possibility of a Total War Victoria coming out in the near future. Also, Oakley High Def, 50 likes, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And Oakley, you have anything else to say?
No. See you guys. This is awesome. Thanks for putting this together.
No problem. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go ahead and have a link in the description below for Oakley High Dev's channel. Go ahead and check it out. He's got great videos on there. Great historical, great massive battles, great everything. Go ahead and check that out. This is gonna be Sunjetsu signing out. So first of all, I want to first ask you, what other eras would you like to see in a Total War game? What other types of parts of history, human history, would you like to see?
That's a good question. I've always been partial to like the medieval period, just because there's so many movies on it, so many great themes, great technology progression. But I think new areas that we haven't explored yet, I think maybe pushing on the cusp of World War One would be really cool. But then also expanding to different parts of the world. I think what they did for Japan was really cool. The game itself had awesome mechanics, but the theme and the setting was great. So people have been discussing doing a warring period. What's it called? The Warring States period in China, and just expanding into that whole region. Not too many people know about it, so I'm not sure about the appetite for people, but there's definitely a lot of history there. A lot.
This video is going to be today. More of the well, actually all the latter, and then I'll have another video coming up that will talk more about Warhammer and your opinions on some of the online aspects of it. But first, let's go ahead and talk about the historical stuff. This is just talking about the presumably historical, maybe Total War Victoria game that might come out, may or may not be the next historical title. What's up, subscribers? Sunjutsu here, and today I wanted to go ahead and talk to you guys with Oakley High Def. How you doing, Oakley?
Hey guys, I'm doing good. I'm excited for the launch of the new game and possible historical stuff that is looming in the future too.
Awesome, and that's what the focus of
of interesting stuff. The development in China, in particular, history-wise, they surpassed the West in technology and population and productivity. So there's a lot of stuff to be done in that area. So I think that would be really cool to go explore.
That actually leads me into my next question. I'm glad you kind of went into that. What part of the map of the world map that we live in today would you like to see in a Total War campaign map the most, besides Europe, since we've